Hello and welcome to another video where we take a look at 50 things that you might not know about one of your beloved childhood video games. This time it's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. I hope you enjoy the video. Okay, number 1 on our list, the guy in the skate shop reacts to several different secret skaters. If Darth Maul is selected, he'll be choked by the Force. For Wolverine, he looks like he's expecting a fight. And for Officer Dick, he'll cover his face and look away, as you can see part of Officer Dick's bum crack from behind. If Private Carrera is selected, he'll start trying to hit on her.
Yeah, check you out. Checking me out. Checking you out. Checking me out. I'm checking you out.
For Ollie the Magic Bum, he'll faint and just generally be disgusted by him. And for Demoness, he'll become surrounded by flames and start screaming. On the Japanese version of the game, there are 3 exclusive skaters. The first one is Junosuke Y. This is likely to be Junosuke Yonesaka, a pro skater from Japan. Just before turning 40 back in 2017, he dropped some impressive street tech in collaboration with VHS Mag, while he's also still active on Instagram. Looks like he's still going strong. The second is Shin Okada. He's credited with being one of the pioneers of the Japanese skating scene, and was also the first Japanese skater to make an international debut with an American skate company. He even published his autobiography just last year. Last is Hiroki Saigusa. Another Japanese skater of course, but I can't find too much information on him. He has his own Instagram page which is regularly updated, and he seems to have done some work with Japanese skate company Joint. There's a haunted house on Surburbia, and if you try to go through the front door, this happens. However, when you do the same thing with Demoness, you get a secret message that says, "Welcome home." If you go to the secret area on Skater Island and board the pirate ship, you can see another level in the scenery. It's the cruise ship. This is an Easter egg that took a while before it really became public knowledge. However, once it was found, it did indeed become pretty popular. If you break all the glass in the atrium on the cruise ship, you'll hear a secret message from the true captain.
Yes, you skater down there! You have shattered the glass and set me free! From the fiery depths I have returned, the true Captain Jennings! That imposter will not be bothering us anymore! Yes, for your diligence I offer this bit of advice. Don't jump in the water. It's wet.
Just sit there.
Thank you.
On Canada, if you go to this ramp here, you can see a guy taking a piss off the side into the icy water below. On Thug 2, when this level made a comeback, he was replaced by the Ramp Kid, who says, "I don't want to die," when you knock him off the side. You can see this in my 50 things you might not know about Thug 2 video. On Tokyo, there's this area of scenery behind where you spawn on the level, with cars driving around on the roads. It's possible to jump off and car plant on a vehicle if you time it just right. However, it's impossible to land it as you're out of bounds. When you begin the airport level on career mode, the goals will cycle through one by one. When the pickpockets goal plays, a special music track also plays. It's actually from Spiderman on the PS1, which was another game made by Neversoft. Sticking on the airport, there's this area here that's outdoors and even has a helicopter in it. If you grind on the helicopter's rotor blades, it takes off and lands somewhere out of eyeshot. Have you ever wondered where it goes? If you wall ride up this wall with or without moon gravity, you can see where it lands. Sadly, it just disappears among the scenery. Have you ever noticed how the floor of the airport level seems to reflect the ceiling and other aspects of the level? Have you wondered how this effect was created? Well, if we take the camera down underneath the level, you can see parts of it were duplicated and placed under the floor, which is translucent. This gives the effect of a shiny floor that reflects the ceiling. Pretty cool. And if you want to know how I took the camera down here, well, keep watching the video to find out. On Surburbia, there is the Thin Man, who seemingly owns the haunted house on the level. If you approach him on career mode with most characters, he asks the player to bring him his key, and that's it. However, if you approach him with Demoness, he'll fall in love with you and bust out some dance moves. This is actually the same animation that the skate shop owner uses when he's trying to hit on Private Carrera. On Rio, there are several out-of-bounds alleyways that you can access, again with or without the use of moon gravity. I'm using moongrav here because it's easier and therefore quicker to record. Anyway, so there's this one which is near to where you enter the secret area. Then there's this one which is close to one of the roads that vehicles use to exit the level. It actually gives you a warning that you're straying too far from the park when you enter it. Next there's this one, which is to the left of the same road we just discussed. This one's quite cool because the alleyway extends into some buildings a little, so you can go inside them. It also extends further than you think, so you can go slightly beyond this patch of grass. Lastly, there's this one, which is near the other road that leaves the level. This one is probably the biggest to explore and could be even bigger if it weren't for the invisible walls blocking you from being able to explore the road itself. Obviously, by entering this alleyway you bypass the check that the game makes to see if you're still in bounds, like it would do if you tried to skate down the road. On future games with areas like this, you can skitch or jump on top of a vehicle to explore further, but sadly on Pro Skater 3 it doesn't let you ride on a car, just carplant it. Bob Burnquist is a regular pro skater in the Tony Hawk series, appearing in almost all the games. However, he is missing from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. The reason is that he was appearing in ESPN X Games Skateboarding instead, which was in development at the same time. Funnily enough, Tony Hawk's 3 actually has a level from Bob's home country of Brazil, which is Rio of course, and Bob just had to go and miss it. There is an exclusive character on the PC version of the game called Doom Guy. Yes, he's from the Doom series, however he's only accessible through the entering of an in-game cheat. A nice little touch though was that the developers programmed the cheat to be IDKFA, which was also a cheat in Doom itself and gave the player full weapons, ammunition and all keys. The Game Boy Advance version of the game also had two exclusive characters. The first is Sean Palmer, the professional snowboarder. He was likely included because Activision released Sean Palmer's Pro Snowboarder around the same time. And there's even a playable demo of Sean Palmer's Pro Snowboarder on the PS2 version of the game. There was also another secret character called Mindy as well. Speaking of exclusives, there was a level that was only included on the Xbox version of the game. It was called Oil Rig. And yes, you're right, it was set on an oil rig. It was never heralded as the best level, but I actually think it's fairly ambitious and unique in its design. It's set over several phases, upper and lower tiers, and you can get around by jumping down or getting a little lift to other floors. I guess the downside of this level is that it does feel a bit sparse in terms of objects at certain points. As I mentioned, this level was an Xbox exclusive. However, I'm actually playing it on the PC version here by using the Lost Levels mod. Also, if you recognise the level, it might be because the oil rig returned in Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. The PS1 and N64 versions of the game were also treated to an exclusive level, Downhill, not to be confused with Downhill Jam. Although like Downhill Jam, it's a linear level. You start at the top of a mountain where you can see Christ the Redeemer, which means it's likely set in Rio. If you recognise the level, well, that's because it went on to appear in certain versions of Tony Hawk's Project 8, although the level was changed somewhat. Despite those changes, the level has never been very well received by fans, partly because of the big stretch of water you had to jump over towards the end of the level, which can be pretty annoying. Okay, keeping with the exclusive levels, there was a special level in the Game Boy Advance version as well. It was called The Zone. Unlike the other levels we talked about, The Zone would never return in any other title in the series, and wasn't ported to any other version of the game with any mods. Did you know that there was a level that was cut altogether? Yes, there's a half-finished level lurking in the game's files, and that level is Paris. Yes, the French capital was due to make an appearance in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, but for whatever reason, it was canned partway through the development of the game. But thanks to the Lost Levels mod for the PC version, we can play it. It's set around the base of the Eiffel Tower, as you can see here. Not everything you'd expect to be grindable is grindable, as the level isn't finished. But overall, I think it could have made a nice addition to the game's level roster. But for whatever reason, it was cut. Interestingly, Paris was one of the levels that was announced early, way before the game was released, and received praise from reviewers at the time. Therefore, there are some conflicting reports about which versions of the game it was meant to be on, including the GameCube and the PS1. However, some unfinished files were found on the PS2 disc. Some early screenshots of the game show Paris in the Foundry slot in the level roster, while other information says that it was meant to come after the airport in the level flow. There is a Paris level that appears on the Game Boy Color version of the game, but as you can imagine, it looks totally different. On the PS1 and N64 versions of Canada, the level is set in a different location to the PS2 version. On the PS2, Canada is surrounded by trees, so it's next to some kind of woodland. However, on the PS1, those same trees are replaced by buildings, meaning that the level is now set in a city, possibly Calgary? It's likely that the Demoness character was based on a comic book character called Purgatory, due to the strong resemblance between the two. She was originally in the comics published by Chaos Comics, with her first appearance coming back in 1994. Purgatory is a vampire-like creature, whereas Demoness is a beast from the depths of hell. On the PS1 version of Rio, there is a completely different secret area to explore, and it's actually more expansive than the PS2 equivalent. However, that's not all. In the secret area, there is a hidden message from the developers of the game. It is written on the wall in Portuguese and says, and I'm sorry for the way that I'm about to pronounce this, A competição seja advertida. Os jogos de Shaba sal juice. This translates to, competition be warned, games from Shaba are God. Shaba Games was the video game developer responsible for the PS1 port of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. On the PS1 version of Surburbia, did you know that the haunted house is actually out of bounds? To cope with the reduced capabilities of the PS1 console compared to PS2, the game's developers had to make the levels smaller in some instances, and also reduce the complexity of them. For example, here on Surburbia, the ice cream van is static, whereas it drives around on the PS2 version. At the trailer park on Surburbia, there's a sign that reads Utopia. If you skate into it, some of the letters will fall off, leaving the sign saying TP instead. So we've mentioned the pickpockets on the airport once already, but it's time to talk about them again. Originally they were intended to be terrorists, but due to the events of 9/11 they had to be hastily changed to pickpockets instead. The name of the model in the game's files is still called Terrorist A. Also, it's likely that their animations remain the same. They seem to press something in their hands sometimes, then hold their hands high up in the air, causing nearby people to run away. It's theorized that they were originally holding detonators. Also, if you look closely on the machines that are likely for scanning luggage, they're called the No Bomb 2000. On the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 late beta that was released by a user named Cyruk, we can see that the lost luggage found goal was originally called Bombs Disabled. And lastly, the things that the pickpockets say also point towards them being more than pickpockets.
get taken over. Move it! Move it! Yippee-ki-yay! Yippee-ki-yo! Move it!
Sticking with the airport, there are some differences in the PS1 and PS2 versions of the level. It's set at night rather than during the day on the PS1. There's this restaurant area partway through the level, and the section with the helicopter that flies away, which we saw earlier, was completely changed to an indoor area instead. Did you know that Skater Island is based on a real-world skate park, which was also named Skater Island? It was located in Rhode Island and sadly suffered a roof collapse in May 2004, which forced the park to shut, and sadly it never reopened. On the outdoor area of Skater Island, if you go over to this area here, you can see a crab, which hides from you if you get too close to it. There's also these birds here which I've never really noticed before, probably because they fly high up into the air when you skate near them. Also, have you ever wondered what the door to the secret area looks like on the other side before you open it? Well, here you go. It's untextured, which probably isn't surprising. One of Demoness's special moves is the AC Air. This likely stands for Antichrist Air. It's similar to the Christ Air special trick, but it's upside down instead. Also, the base score for this trick gets you 666 points. The ramp roll-in gap on Skater Island is called the Aaron C. Roll-in of Death gap, which is a reference to Aaron Camerata's faceplant on the very same ramp, which can be seen in the Neversoft Bales video. Aaron worked at Neversoft from 1998 until 2002, where he worked on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 through 4. On the PS1 version of the game, the secret area on Skater Island has been completely changed. It's accessed through a different door altogether, and it leads out into an outdoor skate park surrounded by trees and greenery. There are a couple of adjoining buildings you can see from here, as well as a telegraph pole. But most notably, there's no pirate ship, no sea, and no cruise ship in the distance. On LA, you can trigger the earthquake by grinding 4 specific rails. If you leave this one until last, grind it going back up towards the spawn point, then quickly get to the freeway, you'll discover that it's actually not solid for a while the earthquake is occurring. It's likely because the original freeway is being swapped out for the broken freeway that replaces it. And this is sort of an interim one that's there for a few moments. I mean, well, that's my best guess. Sticking with LA, there are these two guys here who argue about all manner of things. There are quite a few different things that they argue over, however, sometimes they will actually talk about things that are related to the Tony Hawk's video games, or skating in general, such as downhill levels versus open environments, and street versus vert skating.
Vert street. Vert street. Vert street. You are so not getting it. Downhill levels.
Open environment.
Downhill levels.
You open
are
environments.
so
Downhill
not
levels.
getting it.
Open environments.
If you go near the movie theatre on LA, you can hear music playing. It's actually the same track that's used for the It's TV Time house on Surburbia. Let's take a listen. A portion of the LA level is actually used for the backdrop of the skate shop at the main menu. If we take the camera out of bounds, we can see that the bit that's used is that same movie theatre we just discussed, as well as the building next to it and the vert ramp that sits in between it. If it was actually in LA, this is right about where the skate shop would be. Let's take a look over here at this portion of the level. If we look at this building, we can see that it's called Findley Tower. This is a reference to one of the game's developers, Chad Findley. Similarly, if we look out of bounds in Tokyo, close to where we got the car plant earlier in the video, we can see another reference to one of the developers of the game. There's a building with Studio Gary written on it. This likely refers to Gary Jesdanen, one of the programmers at the time, who is now listed as the programming director at Neversoft. Okay, earlier in the video I filmed some shots with a free camera, and now we're going to talk about how to activate it. To use the secret debug camera, you have to load a level from the skate shop. Then keep your eye on the moving Neversoft eyeball in the bottom left corner of the screen. It'll briefly stop moving 3 times before the level loads. On the third freeze, you need to press and hold start until the level begins. This is quite hard to time, so you might need a few tries to get it to work. If you've done it right, when you load the level it'll be paused, however you'll be able to move the camera around. The left analog stick pans the camera, the right analog stick moves the camera left and right and forward and backward, and R1 and R2 moves the camera up and down. You'll need to reset the PlayStation 2 once you're done, as there's no way to exit this mode. Okay, time for a staple of the Tony Hawk's games. It's selecting the Neversoft developers as skaters. To do this, we first need to enter a cheat. It's "We Eat Dirt." All caps and all one word. Once you've done this, go to Create a Skater and change the name. First, if you enter Mini Joel, we have a miniature Joel Jewett. However, you can also enter Joel Jewett to get the regular Joel Jewett. Entering Sandy Jewett gives you Sandy Jewett. I believe she actually has a wanted poster of Joel Jewett on her board, and is likely Joel's real life wife or partner. Connor Jewett unlocks Connor Jewett's appearance. He's only 7 years old and could well be Joel and Sandy's son. Enter Eastside and you get Aaron Camerata. Yes, the one from the Bales video we saw earlier. Enter Aaron Skillman, or just Aaron, to get Aaron Skillman. GI Skills or Skillzilla unlocks GI Skills. I would assume this to be Aaron Skillman as well, as the height and birthplace are the same. Perhaps Aaron used to be in the army? Type Alan Flores or Maya's daddy to get Alan Flores. Entering 062287 transforms your skater into Benjamin Scott Pye. DDT gives you Bow Hunter. Enter Brain Eaters for Nolan Nelson. Brian Jennings gets you Brian Jennings. Enter Captain Jennings or Captain Jennings for Captain Jennings, who appears on the cruise ship level, but you can only hear his voice. You never see him, well, until now. Enter Chad Findley or Doofus for Chad Findley. Type Chris Glenn for Chris Glenn. Name your skater Chris Roush or CJR for Chris Roush. Calling your skater Stephen Roush will grant you access to Stephen Roush. He's only 7 years old and is likely to be Chris's eldest son. Andrew Roush gets Andrew Roush, probably another of Chris's sons. He's only 4. And if you enter James Roush, you get James Roush. This little guy is just 2 years old and is likely the third of Chris Roush's sons. Chris Ward gets you Chris Ward. Entering Darren Thorne, or just Darren, will change your skater into Darren Thorne. Dave Cowling unlocks Dave Cowling. And Dave Stoll gets you Dave Stoll. Edwin Fong gives you Edwin Fong Artist. Gary Jesdanen, or Garvin, gives you Gary Jesdanen. Typing Scott Peace or S Peace gives you Hardcore Peace. Named Scott Peace really, of course. Scott is another developer who likely coded his young son into the game as well. If you enter William Peace, you'll get William Peace. He's just 1 year old. Henry G gives you Henry G. Typing Grass Patch unlocks Isaac Burns. Enter Jason Uyeda for Jason Uyeda. Jeremy Anderson gives you Jeremy Anderson. Type in Johnny O for Johnny O. Typing in Kage gives you Junkie Saita. Naming your character Frogham will give you Kendall Harrison. Kevin Mulhall is for Kevin Mulhall. And Lisa Davies is the code for Lisa Davies. Entering Hi Ben will unlock Mark L. Scott. Interestingly, you can also see the phrase Hi Ben on the training level in the secret room. However, if you enter 80s Mark, it'll give you a character who I assume is based on how Mark L. Scott looked when he was younger. Using the name Gorilla will give you Matt Duncan. Use Mick West to get Mick West. Enter Nicole Willick to play as Mighty Nick. Of course her real name is Nicole Willick. Mike Ward gives you Mike Ward. Enter Noel Hines or just Noel to access Noel Hines. Paul Robinson changes your skater into Paul Robinson. Pimpin' Frank changes your character into Pimpin' Frank. No idea who this one is. Use the code Ralph D'Amato for Ralph D'Amato. If you enter Rastapopolous, you can actually play as the guy in the skate shop. Use the name Andy Nelson to get Richter. Real name Andy Nelson, of course. Enter Riley Hawk to use Riley Hawk. This is one of Tony Hawk's sons. He's now a professional skater in real life and actually appeared on later games in the Tony Hawk series. He was only 7 years old back then. By entering Spencer Hawk, you can unlock Spencer Hawk, Tony Hawk's second son, who is now a musician. He was only 2 years old back then and he even has a dummy. Calling your skater Ryan McMahon will change him into Ryan McMahon. Use Stacy D to access Stacy D. Name your character Steve Gannum to access Steve Gannum. Entering Crash Cart will transform your character into the Pouncer. I'm not sure who this is, but I do remember a gap on Tony Hawk's 2 called Pouncer Was Here. So it's likely the same dev. And finally, Trey Smith will give you Trey Smith. Use Pete Day to access Peter Day. Enter Matthew Day for Matthew Day. Presumably this is Peter's son. And Rachel Day gives you Rachel Day. Again, this is likely to be Peter's daughter. Some of the gaps on Skater Island are strangely named after the references to the movie Coyote Ugly. I'm not sure why this is, although I was watching an Andy Thupp stream lately, where he recalls that it was likely Aaron Camerata who was the culprit. Anyway, here's a rundown of at least some of them. 42 miles to NYC hop. Dancing on the Tables transfer. Fiji Mermaid hop. Mr. O'Donnell hop. Piedmont North Dakota gap. South Amboy New Jersey gap. The Boss gap. The Heartbreaker gap. The Jersey Nun gap. The Law transfer. The Rollerboy gap. Russian Tees gap. And the Dreamer gap. If you head out to the pirate ship on Skater Island and lip trick on this mast, either the pirate or the parrot will talk to you.
Ah, matey, your flips are so mob.
Mom flips, man!
On Tokyo, it's possible to get up to this roof, either with or without moon gravity. Again, I'm using moon grav here just to make it easier and quicker to record. Anyway, it looks like you weren't meant to get up here, as this platform is quite glitchy. Check this out. Officer Dick is a secret character that appears on Tony Hawk's 3, as well as other Tony Hawk's games. Did you know that he looks totally different on the PS1 version of the game compared to the PS2 version? On the PS2 he looks like your average cop, however on the PS1 version he looks like he's wearing riot gear instead of a standard uniform. If you go over to this house on Suburbia, you can see that it has the number 420 on it. This happens to be one of Neversoft's favourite numbers, and you can find it scattered throughout the series. Sticking in the suburbs, did you know that one of the construction workers farts? I honestly never heard this when I was younger because I always had the soundtrack playing. But after recording footage for this video without the soundtrack on, I was finally able to hear it.
Wait, I got another good one.
Man, something crawl up there and die?
On the Foundry level, there's a gap called TC's Rail. You might recall the name TC from other games in the series as well. I remember there being a gap on Pro Skater 2 that was also named after TC, for example. Have you ever wondered what TC stands for? Well, it stands for Team Chicken, which is apparently a nickname for Neversoft developer Chris Rausch. On the airport, there's a voiceover that makes announcements while you're skating through the stage. There's one in particular which mentions Mr. Thorne. This is a reference to one of the Neversoft developers, Derek Thorne.
Mr. Thorne, please report to the white courtesy phone.
You might already know that you can change the clothes of the pro skaters on this game. However, this generally doesn't extend to secret skaters. In fact, Private Carrera is the only secret skater whose clothes you can change. Also, if you take a look at her information, you can see that she's actually a corporal rather than a private. Looks like she's had a promotion since Tony Hawk's 2. Similarly, if we look at Darth Maul's information, we can see that he's listed as being from Iridonia. However, this seems to be a mistake, as he was actually born on Dathomir in the Star Wars universe. Interestingly, other sources also erroneously reported that he was from Iridonia, such as the 2014 reference book, Star Wars: A Galaxy at War. And here we are at number 50. We're going to finish the video where we started it, with the guy in the skate shop. As we saw earlier in the video, his name is actually Rastapopolous, and his origins go way further back than Pro Skater 3. On Pro Skater 2 he existed as just a still image, also in the game's skate shop, where you could choose your deck. You might not remember him being on the original Tony Hawk skateboarding, and that's because he wasn't. Well, not on the final game at least. He was however featured in several early beta builds of the game as a playable skater, so he's been with us all along. And there we go, 50 things you might not know about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time.